Americans need to know that the Canadians or the Canadian people don't own Canada. There's all this talk about America becoming the 51st state. If you guys recall on my channel, I wrote a poem back in 2012, Oh, How I Long an American Takeover. Unfortunately, Canada really doesn't have an identity. You go to Mexico, it's Mexico because the people there are Mexican. They speak their language, they're Roman Catholic, they're Mexican culture, food, everything. Food, music, people, attitude, everything Mexican. Just south of the border here, the United States of America. It's still, I can call it America. The people that live there are Americans. They have an identity, they have everything. Canada, it's kind of a watered down identity. Me growing up as a child of Portuguese immigrants coming from Portugal to Canada, we weren't allowed to call ourselves Canadian. We were always the problem of Canada. We were Canada's problem, the Portuguese, right? That's why there was a big 2007 and 8 deportation of Portuguese. We were considered the problem at the time, right? We learned English, we became part of the culture, and we built the country. The Portuguese, Italians, Greeks built Canada, right? And what Americans need to know that the Canadians don't own Canada. Canadians, it's not in Canadian ownership, okay? And what am I saying? It's very simple. Everything goes back to China. Everything goes back to 2010 with the Vancouver model, okay? In 2010, Vancouver passed a law or a bill or a memorandum or whatever you want to call it, allowing foreign Chinese nationals to come park their money in the province of British Columbia and no questions asked. Buy real estate, no problem. Create artificial shortages and the locals can't get into their own markets. And there was Chinese people in China making fun of us or making fun of the people in Canada, basically stating that, hey, the Canadians can't even own their own real estate. Let's go buy them up. We covered that article in 2014 on the channel here. We're trying to wake you guys up that this is an economic takeover. And our governments are selling us the highest bidder. Oh, you got to blame your government, Mike. Your government's at fault, not the Chinese people. The government is China! Our government is China! Wake up! So anyways, so what am I talking about? Well, I'll tell you what I'm talking about. How Canadians don't own Canada. Right now, they are looking at $1,816 billion laundered through Canadian real estate. $1,816 billion at purchase, though. It could have gone up now into the trillions. Right, so $816 billion from China. 40% of it was through fentanyl. Chinese gangs bringing in the fentanyl from the southern China province. We covered that in 2015. And then in 2018, 2019, the fentanyl started coming in from the Chinese factories in Mexico that were bringing it up through the southern U.S. border. And you got to remember that America is the number one drug-consuming country in the world, right? Now, this real estate thing was pretty interesting. We were reporting back in 2014, 2015 for you guys, 2016, on real estate agents that were telling us that people were coming in from China with entire suitcases full of cash. This gentleman that we spoke to was counting 3 to 4 suitcases per day. He would tag it, number it, and then he'd put the information of the owner and what property he wishes to buy. Some of them didn't even want to see the property. They're just like, give me the deed, give me the information, just buy me properties. So they were taking in 3 to 4 suitcases full to the brim with cash, American and Canadian cash. His job was to take it, file it, count it, number it, and then buy the property with the money. right? And this is billions of dollars were done like this. Canada had a policy, no questions asked, if your money's coming in from China. If your money's coming in from Russia, Portugal, even a Canadian, like me, when I bought my house here in the little town I'm in for $260,000 or $280,000 when I bought my house, I had to do a money laundering background check to make sure I'm not laundering the money. And then, oh, you own a business in Vancouver. We're going to have to audit that business. I paid an accountant $7,000 they had to do audits on my business to make sure I wasn't laundering money. I'm like, wait a minute, there's people coming in with suitcases. The news is reporting it. But you guys come after the Canadians. Then it wasn't just me. I had other Canadian people from Canada. So I'm a Portuguese, I live in Canada, right? But other Canadian people would come to me and say, hey, Mike, they're auditing me for money laundering. Who do you work for? The government. They want to know, okay, so why? Well, I sold my house in Vancouver. Now I want to buy a house here in Merritt. Okay. So what's the problem? You have the proceeds of the house. No, they want to make sure that house I bought 14 years ago wasn't laundered money. Oh my God. So they were coming after the Canadian proper or the European expansion like myself, right? So this created artificial shortages, and that's why you can't afford to live in any. You can't afford anything of a house here in Canada. We've been showing you side-by-side videos in 2014, 2015, 2016, all the way to 2020, showing you guys. Look at this house in Vancouver, this 4-bedroom, but it's a tear down. It's garbage. It was built after World War II. It's junk, and your neighbors are right on top of each other. You got no land, no backyard. The same house in Florida. Okay, the house in Vancouver was going for $4.8 million. But the same house in Florida, the same house, type of house, in a busy suburban area or kind of city-ish area, same house was going for $140,000. And you're paying $4 million for it in Canada. It's all laundered money. And for the longest time, I've been trying to warn America, hey, America, wake up. Your biggest threat isn't Iraq. Your biggest threat is Canada. Right? It's not the Canadian proper or the European expansion in Canada. It's the people that are coming here and buying out Canadian assets, right? Now, you could say that for a lot of farming that's owned. We read the article for you guys in 2016. Chinese investors paying 100 times over asking price for farmland. Search our channel. You'll find it. 100 times after asking over price. 100 times over. Chinese investors parking their money, getting it offshore. It got so bad that China had to put capital flows on their capital. We covered that too in 2018. Right? And then we have oil companies that the Chinese are heavily invested in and own some of it outright, and then own a majority of shares. Then we have gold companies that they own in Canada. We're talking about in Canada, the Chinese own. The biggest coal company in BC, no Canadian hires, owned by China. Lithium ion in Alberta, owned by China. Everything is Chinese, like it's predominantly Chinese owned. The Canadian people don't have the wealth. Canadian people have their wealth in real estate that was propped up by foreign investing or foreign money laundering. Propped up our real estate and made people, homeowners, wealthy on paper, literally overnight, but left a huge generation that's lost that can't even get into the real estate market. Ever. My kids will never be able to get into the real estate market. Never. If my son at 10 years old today started working, by the time he was 20 some odd years old, he still wouldn't have enough to put a down payment on a house. Because we're completely bought out. And I live in a 2-stoplight town. I live in a town with 2 stoplights. You go to rural America with 2 stoplight towns and see what people are paying for real estate there. They're not paying it in the millions like we are up here, right? So the farms. So then you got Trudeau, right? Trudeau inherited the housing crisis in Canada. He didn't start it. It started in 2010 with the Vancouver model. Then they got so desperate but they're like, oh, but if you look at StatsCan immigration polls, it doesn't even show, and Chinese are barely on the radar. They're not even, because they're not reporting them as immigrants, they're reporting them as investors. That doesn't make the cut. So what did they do? Vancouver started to lose a lot of flight. A lot of people moving out, like myself. A lot of us left Vancouver. Not because we couldn't afford to live in Vancouver. It's because I'm not paying $2 million for a house that I could buy somewhere else for 200 grand. It just doesn't make any sense. Bang for the buck, right? Remember we talking about that, right? So as Vancouver started to see its youth leaving, mass exodus around 2015, 2016, mass exodusing, they put on the foreign buyers tax for Chinese people. So when they come to Vancouver, they have to pay a foreign buyers tax. Entire empty towers, entire empty homes everywhere. I'm walking the streets of Vancouver showing you guys all empty homes. They put the foreign buyers tax. What does that do? Seattle, Washington State got crippled in 2017 overnight once they put that foreign buyers tax in Vancouver. Washington State got destroyed overnight. And then what happened? The tsunami moved east, destroyed the Toronto housing market. Destroyed it. Canadians don't own Canada. We think we own real estate on Crown land that we don't own because we pay an enormous amount of property tax on. Americans think they're paying so much for this. Watch when they get to Canadian levels, like we've been warning you guys. We've been quoting a very famous phrase on here that we stole from a movie called Fast and Furious 5 in 2002. I don't even remember when Fast and Furious 5 came out. But there was a very famous quote on that video. And he said, when you dominate people with violence and they have nothing to lose, what do? They fight back. And we've been saying this little quote along all these years on this channel, that once you start dominating people, now let me rephrase that. When you start dominating people with violence, economic despair, lies, more lies, taxation, or taxation into poverty. We're not in a recession. We're in a depression. We told you guys that 5 years ago. We are in a depression. What do people do? They fight back. I got nothing to lose now. And that's why you're seeing an uptick in violence across cities, all across these towns. Now, America's getting a taste of it with the Biden selection. When Biden was selected for presidency, he wasn't selected by chance. He was selected to fast forward America into becoming like Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the UK. He is to fast forward, and we coined a term on here called Amerifornia, where all of America becomes California. Multiple levels of government, homelessness, layers of government, homelessness, taxation, and artificial shortages through housing, right? And yeah, Canadians don't own Canada. Canada's is not owned by the Canadians. We're on Crown land, and a good portion of our country is owned by China and Chinese influence and Chinese corporations. And the Chinese own, why do you think Trudeau went down to Mar-a-Lago? He went about fentanyl? Trudeau went down to Mar-a-Lago because he needs to protect Chinese interests, right? Trudeau was blaming Airbnb for the housing shortage in Canada. In 2016, we're already reporting 1.8 million empty homes across Canada. And then now in 2024, December 2024, now they're saying there's about 3.8, maybe 4 or 5 million empty homes owned by foreign investors, creating artificial shortages. So Trudeau is blaming 20,000 or 100,000 Airbnbs as Canada's housing problem, but he doesn't look at the vacant home problem that we have in Canada. That's why we don't own our country. Because if we owned if Canada was owned by the Canadians, it would be a different country. Because we just take back our country. We'd be off the crown. We'd get off this whole British, whatever this crown shit is, and we would move on and find our way through time, and eventually and cut the government by 80%. We don't need all this governance. We don't need all these layers of government. Communities need to work together. Okay, you need some small governance to maintain the roads and make sure the infrastructure is open. We don't need a wheat board. We don't need a grain board. We don't need a corn board to tell us what they are buying the corn at or wheat at. So farmers struggle and can't even afford to get by. We need we need to take the country back as a whole. We need to get rid of the bureaucracy, the red tape, the government intervention. We need to get rid of all of that. This is very, 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 very important that America knows that if Canada becomes the 51st state of America, what is, or what's left, or what is Canada? Why has this been allowed to go for this long? Why? Canadians or people living in Canada here always believe that America has our back, they'll back us up, whatever. So they never had that, worry of being taken over by a world, but we're being taken over economically by China. Halifax is destroyed by Chinese money laundering. And there's a lady that emailed me that told me, Mike, my 34-year-old son is a full-time plumber. He's a registered technician, plumber, top of the line, everything. He can't afford. The Chinese came in and bought everything up. They're driving Mercedes and all kinds of fancy cars, and we can't even get into our own in Halifax. Halifax would be like in America, you would Idaho or something like that, a state that a lot of people won't be flocking to, or affordability would be available in a lot of those states. But Halifax is out of reach for locals. We made a video how China is destroying Halifax through basically buying up real estate. Okay, our real estate goes up. We're not producing anything. We don't even own all these mineral rights, and everything we have is either owned by the Crown, the government, and or China. Canadians don't have anything. We don't really own anything. We're renting everything here. I'm a Portuguese citizen. Where's my ID? I'm a Portuguese citizen. My family's Portuguese. We're immigrants. We built this country. They deported us from this country in 2006, 7, and 8. They were deporting people that had kids in Canada. The kids were 13 already years old. They were still deporting them with the kids. Birth tourism is only for China, not for Portuguese. So you guys need to understand, what is Canada? I remember in grade 3, I got detention in grade 3. I still remember this. Because in the hallway we were all talking, and I was saying, yeah, I'm Canadian, and everybody, we're all Canadian. And I got lines. I got detention for talking about how we were Canadian and we were happy. And I think it was Canada Day or something it was at school. And I got detention for saying that. You're a Portuguese. You don't say that. Right? I got fired from jobs. I made a video from you guys. I got fired from jobs because employers found out I was Portuguese. Or they don't like Portuguese, so they fired me. Oh, yeah. But I'm just trying to let you guys know, what's the identity? What's this? If, I made a video again, I don't know, back in 2019, 2020. If Canada goes to war, who would fight for Canada? What would I fight for here? What would other, I'd like to know that too in the comments. If you're watching this video till now, thank you. What would you fight for? If you're in Canada, you're Canadian, what exactly are you fighting for? The crown? Are you protecting the Chinese national interests? Right? We have no industries dead here. We could make an incredible amount of industry in here, but we got to be green. The Paris deal. Right? It's all a lie. Anyways, guys, I'm going to go take care of business here. I'll see you guys on the flip side. Mike Martin's here. I have spoken.